everyone, and welcome to TBR's Management Consulting Benchmark webinar. My name is Allison Crawford, and I will be your host for today's session. TBR is to provide business research to accelerate our customers' success, and the information we'll be covering today comes directly from our Management Consulting Benchmark report. This report is unlike anything available in the market today, with analysis delving into how these firms are successfully managing their business growth and operations. While products from research firms cover this industry, TBR's unique proposition comes from our company-centric model, enabling us to provide insights into the business performance, resource management, go-to-market, and strategies of the management consulting firms themselves. Additionally, our report is published semi-annually, offering data continually that will reveal industry patterns and trends in revenue, headcount, utilization, profitability, and other key metrics on an ongoing basis. Next 45 minutes, analysts Brian Belanger and Senior Analyst Ramunas Svarcas will delve into the trends driving the results featured in the Management Consulting Benchmark, followed by Q&A of these trends and how they will affect you. Before I pass this over to Brian and Ramunas, there are a few logistics I'd like to cover. First, we will be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TRI channel. We urge you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the others we've posted. We'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. Brian and Ramunas will address them at the end of the presentation. Or if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, you can reach them directly at the end of the webinar to set up that discussion. We're going to set up the slides to everyone register for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can find the slides, as well as other thought leadership pieces, other webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight. And don't worry if you didn't write down the YouTube channel or the SlideShare link. We'll be providing those at the end of the deck so you can have access to that. With that, let me introduce Analyst Brian Belanger and Senior Analyst Ramunas Svarcas from the Professional Services team here at TBR. And Ramunas are the primary researchers on the Management Consulting Benchmark, and their work has been used by traditional management consulting firms, software firms investing in in-house capabilities, and services firms furthering their portfolio. We are sure any firm engaging in management consulting will benefit from the information contained within this benchmark. And with that, let me turn this over to Ramunas.
Thank you, Allison. Before we get started in terms of the actual presentation of the information that we've obtained, I wanted to really quickly cover what actually is the TBR Management Consulting Benchmark. Our third webinar, bringing ongoing information in terms of what's happening in the management consulting market. This is a kind study, and it's focused on professional services vendors that are targeting the management consulting space. It provides an in-depth analysis of both revenues and resources dedicated to business and strategy consulting. The most recent edition of this study, the one we're talking about today, was actually purchased by 9 clients, several even vendors that are covered in this study, but those that were interested in finding and getting an understanding of what's happening in the market, and they may perceive as opportunities for themselves either to partner with some of these vendors or develop their own management consulting portfolios. In addition, we found that there are others that have been very interested in this study who are attempting to determine with whom they work as strategic issues are engaged within their organizations and need help in addressing these issues. The 16 vendors, and we rate the vendors into 4 firm type segments. Data is broken up by service lines and geographies to identify leaders and laggards in the various markets. This is based primarily on revenue growth figures that we've estimated for many of the companies. Understandably, there are a number of private firms in here, so we do estimate many of the revenue numbers based on our own research work regarding the companies themselves. And besides extensive PowerPoint presentation that accompanies this study with the vendor profiles and portfolio profiles, also deliver an Excel workbook with this study. Contains the various estimated numbers that we have used to prepare this study. It enables then clients to take a look at these numbers, rearrange them in any way, shape, or form they want for their own internal analysis. So let's get the study results. Seeing that there is definitely a diverse diversification occurring in the management consulting space. Really, the space itself and the various vendors playing in the space is changing. And which of our TBR firm segments that we look at and the vendors belong to, we see transition occurring in the management consulting arena, and firms are focusing on technology-enabled business consulting. So the presentation today is going to be focused on, one, identifying what's actually happening in the management consulting space, who's going, who's not, how achieving success, and one of the ways we've noticed and is noted and we'll point out further is through acquisitions. What are the major trends? And one of the big trends we're seeing is that the people looking at and buying management consulting and looking at the space overall changing. And certainly technology is driving a lot of that change. And people are looking at technology and consulting regarding technology from management consulting firms, and that's not just from the pure IT services vendors. So with that, I'll turn over the microphone to Brian, and he'll walk us through the details.
Thanks, and thank you everyone for joining and listening in. As Ramunas indicated, the first question we face when reviewing our management consulting benchmark results is what's happening in the current market and which the 4 practice areas we cover and winners are experiencing the greatest management consulting growth. And what we're seeing is in the short term, tactical needs driving management consulting demand. Clients are foregoing long-term, more active strategy projects in favor of short-term projects focused on addressing specific tangible outcomes and deliver ROI benefits over a short-term time horizon, and that's flowing through to growth. 2 of the key areas, and that's 1, operations consulting, which is where clients are focusing on trimming operating costs by optimizing their processes in functional areas such as finance, accounting, customer relationship management, supply chain management, HR, as well as technology consulting, which is really driven by 2 factors. Is the continued appearance of technology and technology strategy as a cost center and remove costs from the business and improving efficiency by optimizing the technology layer. But increasingly, as we'll discuss when we speak to our notion of convergence, is how technology is not only cost center but evolving into a actual driver of business outcomes and an enabler of functional improvement, which we see is driving demand. This graph we're looking at here nets out the management consulting marketplace as we view it at TBR. Total revenue number of $62.1 billion that you see at the bottom there. Aggregation of the 16 firms that we cover in the study. So an overall landscape view, but a representation of a chunk of the marketplace. You see is that operations consulting continues to dominate, covering about 44.3% of overall management consulting revenues on a TM basis for first half of 12 in our benchmark, and we believe there's a couple factors at play there. Operations consulting, as I mentioned previously, well to the current management consulting demand environment. Optimization and process improvement is really the investment priority, but it's also a reflection of the influence of the Big 4 firms. Big 4 account for about 46% of management consulting revenues in our benchmark, and with an orientation heavily weighted to the operations space in areas such as finance and accounting. The influence of the Big 4 is driving that share from operations consulting, and those firms continue to expand their practices in the operations space and diversify into areas where they've perhaps had a lesser traditional focus to continue fueling growth market, which is reflected in the results we see here. While operations consulting does continue to grow above 10%, as the strategy consulting, this alluded to, what we see is technology consulting as the leading driver of management consulting growth from a smaller base than some of the mature established service lines such as strategy or operations consulting. But we do see on the here that technology consulting and management consulting growth for our benchmark on a TTM basis in the first half of 12, growing 12% year to year. I'm largely driven by the two factors I mentioned earlier. So initially, leveraging technology as a means of improving operational efficiency and removing costs from the business in the near term, but also making this technology into an enabler of tangible, defined business outcomes. So not only removing costs by optimizing the technology backbone, harnessing cloud to accelerate product or service innovation, or leveraging analytics to improve customer engagement or access new customer channels and better respond to customer needs. It's that convergence that we speak to. Technology moving from purely a cost focus to blended with other advisory services, a real driver of business outcomes. And for that reason, we see technology as continuing to show up as the leading service line in terms of management consulting growth.
I just want to wrap really quickly here, just so everybody's aware. When we refer to technology consulting, management consulting study, we're not talking about the selection of a type of IT component, namely the brand of server or a PC. When we talk about it, technology consulting. We're talking about the strategy regarding technology. Whether or not you do want to, move to the most recent disruptive technology of cloud computing, whether it's the strategy that your organization wants to engage in, and the implications regarding that, whether you're going from a operating model to a CapEx model or vice versa. So it's really understanding the strategy and how it fits into the organization and how it impacts the whole organization. So when we refer to technology consulting, and obviously it looks like a very small bucket, our chart here, it's really looking at it from the strategic consulting aspect, the whole realm of IT consulting in terms of what actual components you're installing, what you're doing. I do look at from in our other services lines and our other syndicated offerings, but it's not really covered and identified here in that manner in this study. So just wanted to make sure and clarify that for everyone.
The question becomes, given those high-level growth trends we see in technology and operations consulting, who are the specific vendors and vendor groupings that are capitalizing? As this graph shows, this graph plots year-to-year revenue growth for the four major firm categories we cover in the benchmark, to year-to-year headcount growth. And the big four is really leading the charge above and all other groups, growing revenues 14.2% year in the first half of 2012 relative to an industry average of 7.6%. 7.6%. So one thing is that the big four really two, three main factors at play that are driving this expansion of the big four positions and the inorganic story as it pertains to diversifying their portfolio in areas such as technology consulting and vertical-specific capabilities or extending reach into new geographies. Also the advantages afforded by the Big Four operating model, their scale and their resource footprint relative to their smaller, more specialized solutions-led or strategy-led peers, allow them to more aggressively invest in new markets such as technology advisory services and operations aggressively into emerging markets, flowing through to growth for the Big Four group above and beyond all other firm categories. So sort of to layer that firm-specific view over the growth areas we're looking at, technology consulting and operations consulting. The graph looking at here, the 16 vendors we cover for the management consulting benchmark. In technology consulting revenue growth and headcount growth for this iteration of the benchmark. And what we see pretty quickly, if we look towards the top right quadrant, is that the Big Four contingent continues to lead the charge in the technology consulting space. And that's largely a result, if we look at PwC and Deloitte, acquisitions that are driving expansion into service lines where those firms not previously played as actively before. To a lesser extent, we also see a similar path pursued by some of the strategy-led players, such as Bain, BG, A.T. Kearney, who are all appearing in that growth leaders section. An approach that blends more of an organic activity around build thought leadership in the space, or hiring experienced industry practitioners in areas such as media, analytics, and mobility and cloud to thought leadership and grow and share as a technology provider, and for that, be better positioned to sit at the table for technology engagement, as well as using a robust alliance ecosystem to offer an end-to-end value proposition of firms such as Deloitte and PwC, or more technology-focused, such as in Accenture. So the same view for operations consulting. What we see, again, is that the Big Four is dominant across the leaderboard. We see Ernst & Young on the edge as the growth leader, is of both headcount expansion and revenue expansion. And we believe it's largely driven by vertical expertise to deliver operational and functional insights that are aligned to specific industry needs, only offering a finance and accounting strategy, but and packaging that in a way that's relevant to a specific industry, such as manufacturing or retail, in that offering differentiation over other providers, just offering operations consulting aligned to specific industries. And then we also see Aon Hewitt, a specialty provider, who's on that leaderboard. To point out that that's largely a result of acquisition and the revenue synergies created by the merger of Aon and Hewitt Associates. It's focused on our consulting space, and in particular health and benefits strategy and increasing investment in growth areas such as that care space. So the key comes, and we've hinted at this with discussion of the growth leaders, but we know where areas are growing, and we know which firms are growing, but how are they doing that? And the foremost that we see, particularly as we speak to the Big Four and their continued outperformance in the management consulting space, is this acquisitions, notably using acquisitions aggressively build scale and build breadth and expand the portfolio in strategic technology advisory services. And we'll highlight this in a little detail with some examples, but capitalizing on that convergence through acquiring technology capabilities. We're all acquisitions as a means of diving into growth verticals such as healthcare or extending emerging market reach. Beyond acquisitions, continue to see additional go-to-market investments leveraged as a means of portfolio expansion in management consulting. So, as I mentioned, with the more strategy-led pure play firms, using alliances, a means of still offering that end-to-end, one-stop shop value proposition, particularly areas where technology implementation or functional transformation requires an implementation or a delivery component as an add-on to a strategy engagement. And then, as I mentioned with the Big Four, a focus on hiring and member firms and building practices to critical mass in emerging markets.
One of the mentioned here also is that as we're looking at acquisitions, not all firms are acquiring at the same rate. Certainly, we know that some of the firms in the benchmark are focusing on vertical expertise expansion and looking at more industry verticals in terms of who can they address, so they're trying to expand their addressable market. But firms are not. They're staying true to their core and just simply trying to focus and build additional expertise, expand a portfolio, address additional issues within that, industry vertical area where they position themselves historically and feel very comfortable in. there's a number of different paths within the management consulting realm in terms of how firms are handling what's happening in the marketplace. We've already seen that demand is up. We expect it to continue to grow. It may slow a little bit here in the second half of 2012 as we review the data for just the past year. Certainly, it's occurring, and we believe it's going to continue to be a key element for many firms to look at management consulting as an avenue to provide them assistance and not have to build capabilities within their organizations to know what their future strategy may be, but they're going to leverage what these firms can offer them.
So, seeing acquisitions occurring, it's really falling into three core towers, and we keep bringing back this note of business and technology convergence. So, an increased acquisition focus on service lines and broadening the service portfolio by expanding into technology consulting, and particularly for the Big Four, diversifying away from operations and organization and change, and moving more aggressively into the technology space. And the example we cite here, PwC, who acquired a boutique social media strategy consulting provider, AnswerIView. So not only being able to offer traditional CRM-related strategy operational services, but being able to blend that with technology-enabled capabilities in social media to not only address cost takeout in the here and now, but be able to implement a long-term social media strategy focused on customer engagement and digital marketing in the future. PwC also recently acquiring Ray Group International to add technology, strategic technology advisory capabilities to the public sector. So continuing this trend as we move through the second half of 2012 and 2013. And we believe this is, in first-line perspective, the area where we'll continue to see the most acquisition activity as that convergence accelerates as we move through iterations of the benchmark. I wanted to point out quickly as well, as Ramunas mentioned, using actions to drive expansion in verticals. Healthcare is the vertical we see a lot of momentum around. Towers Watson purchased Extend Health, which allowed that firm to create an end-to-end value proposition around the private healthcare exchange, and building Towers' front-end health benefit strategy and design services with the best technology to deliver a holistic one-stop shop health exchange solution. And then lastly, the global expansion story. Firms such as KPMG buying capabilities and buying a resource base and a delivery mechanism in markets where they've had a lesser presence to build geographic scale. We'll come back to the discussion of service lines when we look at convergence in the management consulting industry, but just to highlight how some of those acquisition and go-to-market strategies are impacting in real time the codes and the geographies that we view in the management consulting benchmark. So we're looking at healthcare, and in the graph on the left showing by the aggregate vendor groupings, healthcare growth, and then it's aggregated by a specific vendor. Healthcare growth is hovering around an average of 20% year to year, the leading vertical in terms of growth in our benchmark. And we believe this is driven and will continue to be driven by major factors. One is the momentum towards regulatory transformation in that space, creating demand for governance, risk, and compliance services as payers and providers and sector institutions look to comply with extremely complex regulatory requirements. In the long term, we believe what's going to propel healthcare consulting growth and why we believe we'll see more acquisitions in the vein of an Extend Health, whole push towards operational transformation in the healthcare space and using technologies such as mobility to transform the way that healthcare is delivered. So we anticipate increasing movement toward acquisitions in that space and continued growth, continuing to do iterations of this benchmark, and healthcare moves from a regulations model to a deliver long-term options transformation to improve healthcare delivery overall. So to just dive similarly into geography, what this graph shows aggregate geographic revenue. 3 major regions we cover. We see APAC is far and away leading the charge, growing 18% year to year in the first half of 2012, and largely driven by 2 factors. One is the globalization of regional firms looking to scale and be involved from regional enterprises to MNCs and looking for the technology support and the overarching operations strategy to do so. Those MNCs looking to enter the region to remove or access new customer segments by developing operations in APAC and leveraging their traditional consulting partners to do so. We anticipate vendors will increasingly look to acquisitions to capitalize on that demand and build their practices in APAC to be able to do so. Quickly, again, layer that over the landscape that we view for the management consulting benchmark. We see, again, that the Big Four is leading the charge here. Hewitt included there due to acquisition, but Young, Deloitte, KPMG leading the charge in terms of APAC growth and APAC revenue. And that goes back to that notion of scale we talked about earlier. Being able to have the excess resource base and the dollars to quickly build debt practices in emerging APAC markets to capitalize on demand in that region. So we expect continued outperformance by Big Four in that regard in the APAC market in our second half of the benchmark and moving through 2013. So the question becomes, given the landscape we see in the management and consulting marketplace today, and where growth is occurring, where is it going to occur? And in the long term, what segments and what spaces will drive growth? And how do management consulting vendors have to reposition their portfolios to capitalize? And we have a major driver of this is going to be this notion of convergence. And what we mean by that is demand for technology, the need for technology moving from a pure cost center in the CIO office to business enabler in the marketing office and the HR function. And we really see client demand beginning to shift from needing pure operational advice or strategy advice to address a business outcome and not necessarily a specific operational need. And anticipate this will best to a new type of solutions provider that will be required to blend operational strategy advice with technology strategy capabilities to help vendors address business goals such as improved revenues or accelerated globalization or product service innovation. So what we've seen, we're calling this the current market landscape, and what we've seen particularly in the management consulting industry is areas of focus have been areas of traditional competitive advantage. So a vertical axis on this graph we have a level of industry diversification versus specialization. Specific are they is vendor to a particular industry segment, such as financial services or healthcare, relative to the horizontal axis. Are they purely on business or purely on strategic technology? And with the exception of the strategy-led and Big Four firms, who are more diversified, firms such as Accenture and IBM stick out for their technology orientation, where the HR specialty players such as Mercer and Oliver Wyman are specialized in that particular market and focus more on the business impact of HR strategy. And this has dictated a near-term, a competitive advantage based on their market focus. In the long term, what we think we'll see is the convergence of all these vendors towards the middle. As convergence of technology and business strategy brings us to a need for a vendor that can position itself as a one-stop shop for all consulting needs. And what we mean is not focusing on the HR function, but having strategic technology capabilities to transition and transform the HR function for long-term improvement, solely focusing on being a technology-oriented consulting provider and systems integrator and outsourcing provider, but adding industry-specific capabilities to be able to deliver front transformation as well as make the business case for adopt cloud or analytics or other technologies as a driver of distinct funnel improvement. And for this reason, we see Convergence as driving demand for technology consulting above and other service lines we cover in the management consulting benchmark. So, guys, we looked at the what and the who. So, what practice areas in management consulting are delivering the most growth and who's capitalizing? And this is largely a story of the Big Four and leveraging their scale and their traditional strength in operational consulting and technology consulting to address short-term tactical needs focused on removing costs and improving efficiency. And then how are they doing so in cases? And what we'll believe we'll continue to see is a push towards acquisitions as these firms diversify out selectively from their traditional areas of strength to evolve from optional strategy providers or HR providers to one-stop shops of end-to-end management consulting advice that delivers tangible business outcomes measured with outcome-based pricing structures or defined performance indicators. And that is going to occur to drive management consulting in the future. And it's business and technology convergence. And this will have a demand for increased technology advisory services as in analytics, proof of concepts are ensured, and technologies evolve into drive business outcomes such as improved revenues and enhanced customer engagement. And vendors will seek to partner with firms who can blend all things to address these business outcomes. So I'll turn it back over to Ramunas, who highlights some of our key management consulting themes we'll be looking at for second half of 12, and then open it up for questions.
Before I know what we're going to be focusing on next, our next edition of the Management Consulting Benchmark, just kind of an overview. I mean, we've seen management consulting marketplace show some significant growth. It's occurred really within the last several years. It's not unusual. We know that management consulting has traditionally ebbed and flowed over years for various reasons in terms of its demand for strategic help from various enterprise and firm marketplace. And I think that we're seeing the same thing happen again right now. The focus we've just recently seen certainly is a lot of tactical driving. There are some other things that are occurring out there in the marketplace, specifically the advent of cloud computing, which is a significant disruptor in the marketplace. And it's driving management decisions and business decisions, not just IT infrastructure decisions, because companies need to decide not only whether or not they're going to go to a cloud environment and remove and no longer buy hardware, but rent it out there in the marketplace, which is their whole financial dynamics. They're suddenly going to be working in an OpEx model instead of CapEx model, which means suddenly you have all kinds of money that you can spend on other things, and the question becomes, what do you spend it on? On R&D, do you expand your R&D possibilities and work in that area and or grow that way, or do you purchase it? So there's a lot of issues that are going to surface as a result of what's happening out in the marketplace, and not just in terms of the cloud coming, and then also the recent focus on analytics, and many analytics tools are becoming generated in the marketplace. Ideal social media, properly handle social media, all the governance and risk, and these are not necessarily IT services questions, but really are strategy decisions, and the strategy firms are going to be certainly focused on these issues. So I think that kind of overview of where we see the market is definitely changing, and it's going to continue to change and transform. As part of that, in our research agenda, really we're going to continue to focus on what's happening relative to technology and business consulting. How is it converging? What are the impacts? One of the things we believe is may be happening here, and in some cases already is there may actually be a shortage of staff. As some pure IT services firms move into the management consulting space, they're going to be looking for management consultants, whereas management consulting firms are looking for technology consultants. There's a lot of pressure on finding resources. Knowledge management strategy is transforming and evolving. Certainly it's a leading market strategy for many firms in terms of creating knowledge management and bringing customers in. Where is it headed? We saw results that the APAC is a strong growth market, and there's a lot of traction there, and everybody's focused on the APAC market. So certainly it's going to be interesting to see who will ultimately be the winners or losers. Right now everybody's growing at double digits in the APAC market because it's a new market. It's new revenues for them. We'll see who shakes out here in the future. And then, like I had mentioned earlier, there's certainly a movement for some firms to get into specialization from an industry vertical standpoint. So certainly it's an area where we're going to try to identify who's moving in that direction, who is not, and if not why. So it's the floor for questions.
Great. As Ramunas and Brian said, now, if you have questions, I've had a couple come through, please send them through either through the chat function or Q&A. The first question we have, guys, is what do you think is the largest area of future opportunity by service line for management consulting growth?
We hinted on it with our discussion of technology and the idea of this convergence, where I see in the near term the biggest opportunity is the intersection of the two segments we talked about today, so operations and technology. Particularly if we look at analytics and social media through the lens, for example, of the customer relationship management function. Being able to deliver the front end expertise and optional expertise to streamline and optimize the CM process while overlaying technology capabilities and analytics and social media to access new customer channels and better respond to customer demands and be able to allow that to flow through backward to product and service innovation. So I really see in the vein, technology consulting continues to gain critical mass. We see numbers it's at a small base. As strategies mature in technology, I think really the intersection of that with operations is where the real improvement will be delivered.
I disagree with Brian, but I think I also have a strong feeling that there's some alternative areas where there may be some significant growth in the marketplace. I think one of them is from an HR consulting standpoint. For the last year and a half or so, we've seen kind of an interesting dynamic where we've been in recession, hiring has really tapered off, firms have really been very careful about hiring. So they haven't been looking at their overall HR strategies, philosophy, what's happening in the marketplace. They've really been trying to conserve resources and not address the overall HR environment. The issue, of course, is pensions with existing staff. I mean, that also hasn't really been addressed because everybody's been very cautious about where they're spending their money. And I think those are two strategic areas that are going to start driving demand. And if the economies kick off, and again, there's a lot of uncertainty around that, but should we find that suddenly economic climate starts to improve and hiring starts to tighten up, I think there's going to be resource shortages pretty dramatic in some areas that are going to demand some very strong strategic looks at HR strategy. So I think that's an alternative market that may be driving some demand in the future.
Okay, the next question came through. Can the Big Four or others make major acquisitions, or will all the future acquisitions be boutiques as the big fish have already been swallowed?
That's an interesting question. said that, a large acquisition really has to have a good fit. You don't want to duplicate efforts and revenues and have to lift a lot of people, especially if you're covering, the same ground. And that, in the case of the Big Four, probably is one of the challenges for them, because they do have a pretty broad, across the board and across the globe presence from that standpoint. I think, on the other hand, some of the boutique firms, and we've seen some that already happen here within the last couple of years, of mergers in terms of some of the smaller firms potentially merge together to provide and create a much stronger presence in the marketplace. Certainly is a possibility. At the same time, many really smaller firms, on a regional basis, very local basis, city basis, could absorb into the smaller firms very easily, without much ado, to expand their capabilities from that standpoint.
Okay. Next question that came through. You talked about management consulting growth leaders, but what about the laggards? In particular, the solutions-led group, why are they trailing peers in management consulting revenue growth? Yeah,
I think with the solutions-led group, if we look at that sort of convergence axis that we presented earlier, they have the technology backbone, and the difficulty there is scaling it up and moving it along the needle to not that pure technology advisory angle, as Ramunas talked about, with sort of the delineation of what we include in the management consulting benchmark versus what we don't. I think the challenge for them at that strategy front end, and I don't think they've made necessarily demonstrative steps to do yet. So if we sort of parlay back into the acquisitions discussion, I think that's an area of opportunity for a lot of solutions-led players, is to they have technology capabilities, but perhaps buying someone more focused on the strategy side and the perhaps operational advisory side to sort of integrate Deloitte and some of its Big Four peers are coming at it from a getting into technology angle. The solutions-led are tuning and exploring ways to buy advisory angle, and the quickest way maybe for acquisition. We see some experimentation with hiring practitioners in areas such as healthcare. I think they're still exploring strategies to do so, but I think we may not take an acquisition focused on the strategy side for the solutions players as they seek to capitalize on this convergence as well, and be able to make the business case for technology implementation as convergence accelerates.
The other things I think here is that traditionally, our solutions players have focused on given a different set of people in various enterprise organizations in terms of how they're providing consulting or help. The traditional strategy firms certainly are more focused at the very top level, and as we see business being the driver of much of what's happening in the consulting world, be it IT consulting or strategy consulting, is being business-driven. Business operations are being addressed. Improvements in business operations are being addressed. Some of the solutions firms may lack that interaction with that executive level at the very top of the organizations for many of them, which is impeding their success. And they are definitely trying to improve on that and looking at that as an opportunity for them to expand their own management consulting areas by addressing that issue.
Okay. A couple more questions come through, and actually a definitional explanation. Someone missed in the beginning where management consulting was dying. Could we please redefine that again?
So consulting, basically what we're looking at when we talk about management consulting is effectively, business consulting, strategy consulting. We actually have several pages of definitions of all the subcategories of management consulting as part of our. We can get that to you. If you just tell us a note, we'll do that for you. But what we're looking at here is the advisory work that addresses things at a strategic level for organizations. So it includes areas such as operations management. It includes organization and change as part of that, and this the pure strategy. You know, want to continue in the business you're in, or do you want to shift focuses? You know, looking at it at the very top level, do you want to re-engineer your whole company and look at a different strategy for the company? So that's why we have many of the strategy firms and, you know, in the list here that are actually involved in that kind of you know, in engagement. So that's why it's a very, you know, and there's a lot of various areas and services encompassed in our management consulting definition. So certainly if you can provide us an email, we'll get that complete definition list out for you.
A question that came through, where do the Indian firms fall in the mix?
They're trying to become consultants out in the marketplace from a management consulting standpoint. As you're aware, TBR does follow the IT services market quite detailed. The Indian vendors, not many of them have actually expressed a desire to actually become management consultants. They want to be more involved in the consult process, but we don't anticipate them to go all the way into a strategy consulting relationship with many of their clients. It's just not in, so to speak. None of them have really indicated a desire to move in that direction, and we don't expect it to. They certainly recognize that consulting has become a key element in their ongoing relationships with many of their clients, especially as they serve them from an IT infrastructure and an IT sourcing relationship. And they must address business issues, but they're not going to get into management and strategy in any way, shape, or form as far as we can see.
Okay. We have one more question, so if there's any other questions, please send them through now. On a geographic basis, you cited key trends fueling management consulting expansion in the APAC market. What about Americas? What is driving growth there?
Yeah, so we talked about technology consulting throughout this presentation. I think is going to be one of the, as we move forward, particularly thinking of the U.S., technology-enabled transformation will drive growth in the U.S. and the Americas, particularly the U.S. as companies seek to pull that intersection point I was talking about earlier of operations and technology, and seeking technology and seeking to optimize processes through using technology strategy and developing a holistic way to address business outcome through a combination of multiple advisory services, where I think we're going to see particularly industries such as retail. It's also in the healthcare market, and that's something that we see sort of in the near term and long term as a major driver in the U.S. Right now around regulatory transformation and developing healthcare benefit strategies, and I mentioned Tower Watson with an offer around the healthcare exchange. In term, healthcare is going to drive management consulting expansion because of all the strategy development implications surrounding that market. In the long term, mentioned when we presented healthcare is more focused on operational transformation as a way of improving healthcare delivery and satisfying and aligning healthcare more to patient outcomes. And I think that's there's a lot of pent-up demand around how to do that, and what's the strategy driving that? Where does technology fall in? How do we have to reposition our operations? And what's the overarching strategy? And how are we going to harness these changing dynamics to position our healthcare provider model for long-term growth? And I think specific industries and then this convergence of technology and is what we're going to see in the U.S. and in the Americas overall.
Yeah, I would want to also add that the things that we're aware of is that so over this last 4 years, many of the enterprise clients and firms in the United States have really kind of acted in terms of some of the peripheral things that they used to do and maintain at their own organizations. One of those is typically strategic officers and people that were in charge of long-range planning and strategy for the organizations. For many firms, that's guy almost become delegated to one individual in the organizations. And yet do that job properly for the future, actually it takes us out. Rather than rebuilding those staffs internally, and we believe also that many of the strategy firms are going to gain the benefit of that, as well as the various involved in the management consulting arena to provide and augment that kind of staff growth and provide guidance for firms in terms of future strategies for their own organizations. So it's kind of a more overarching belief, but I believe it's going to come to pass here as well.
Great. Any further questions? We are coming up towards the top of the hour, so I have moved us on to all of the contact information. As Ramunas mentioned, this report is now available if there's anyone interested in getting access to it. I encourage you to connect with Ramunas and Brian on Twitter. I have their Twitter handles listed here, as well as the TBR handle, as well as the YouTube and LinkedIn community. So I do encourage you guys to connect with us on social media. In the webinar, we do have a short survey. It's 3 questions. They get your feedback on the presentation, presenters, as well as some open-ended feedback. We are using this feedback to improve our presentations quarter to quarter, so it is important to us to hear what you have to say about our webinar series. I'm going to leave the chat function open for another couple minutes in case there's any last-minute questions or requests for sessions with either of the analysts. If we don't hear from you guys now, we'll look forward to coming to you guys in another 6 months. Have a great day, everyone.